After a 6 month break, MCBC has returned, and with it, we see a ton of new changes, specifically maps. However, today we will be reviewing the teams to see what their strengths and their weaknesses are. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like and maybe even subscribe, and let's get into it. First off, we have the Blue Bullfrogs with Avery, Zen Games, and Pastel Cave. Now, this is a very interesting team, especially with Newcomer Cave. Now, I don't know how good she will be in this type of event. She has played something very similar, being WMCT. However, WMCT has no movement games. So, it's interesting to see how she'll do in those because I think that will really depend how well this team does. Now, I do think she is pretty decent at PvP. Maybe not as good as some of the other people in this event, but it's still pretty decent. And that can help a lot in the many PvP games like Battle Royale and Gold Rush. And then we have Avery, who's just the GOAT. She's just so good at WNCT. More specifically, movement though. PvP can go either way most of the time, but she is definitely very good at more movement related things. However, I would still watch out for her in PvP. She is very good. And then we have Zan, who I don't know how well they do, or at least individually in games. As far as I remember, looking at statistics of like past events, she tends not to do the best. Although I have no idea what her teams were, so I could not be sure. And also, MCBC is very team based as far as scoring goes for the most part. So it could be her team just didn't do that well overall, which obviously would hurt your score. So I don't have like a full grasp on how good she is. Although I feel like she's better at more of the team games like Build Arena and just generally very good at comms, which will definitely help this team. Now, as far as what games this team will succeed, it really depends on Cave in movement. Because I think they can do very solid in PvP games, especially like games like Gold Runners. Now, Battle Royale is more hard to determine because that can go either way for most teams. But I still think they'll be a solid PvP team and maybe even team games team. But who knows? I could be wrong. They could be good at movement as well and they just dominate. But yeah. Next up, we have the Red Raccoons with Rubixel, Lumi, and MBB Gaming. Now, this is another team where I don't know how well the newcomer relatively is. Lumi is a member of Astray SMP and a builder for Minecraft World Cup. But besides that, I don't really know how good they will do in the games in MCBC. So they could be a complete wild card. Although, if that building experience does help, this will definitely help in Build Arena. But anyway, I don't remember how well Rubixel did last event. I know he did like decent, but obviously I believe he's being placed as like second first tag, which is a big thing to live up to considering he did have the very good Golden Ghost event in like MCBC 20, I believe. But yeah, he overall does very well in more like movement related games like Rift Race. However, he still is pretty decent at PvP and all the other games. And then we have MBB, who hasn't been in an event since I believe MCBC 15, which was a while ago. So I have no idea how well he'll still do in the games. He is a bit more of a movement player, if I would say so. He's definitely not as good in PvP games as other people, but I definitely think he's better in games like Rift Race and maybe even Spleef at times. which can definitely be very good because Spleef is a very 50-50 game on whether or not you do good or not. So the fact that he's decent at it helps a lot, in my opinion. Now, as far as games this team is good in, I think PvP will be a bit rough for this team. They don't really have, in my opinion, a very strong like PvP player to help them like stand out. So this just makes it very rough for them. Although I can see them doing good in every other game, basically. They can do good in all the more like movement and team based games, which tend to be the games that get played the most. So who knows? That could be very helpful for them. Next up, we have the Yellow Yetis with Irish Potato, Shawnster, and Just Rise. Now, I have no idea how good Rise is. I did watch a tiny bit of him, and he is a mobile player, but that doesn't really tell me much, unfortunately, about how good he is, because being mobile means you're either really good or really bad, so I have zero idea how good he is, although I believe he's just okay, which is Norris. Irish tends to be pretty 50-50 when it comes to MCBC. She plays for fun most of the times, but even without that, her individual placements vary wildly. She, at least in past events though, she has done way worse, but in more of her recent events, she's pretty well. So I can see her still doing very well on this team. And as far as what she's good at, it's very hard to tell, but I do think she is a pretty decent Relic Raiders player, if I do say so. And then we have Sean, who is very good. I think he's more all rounded. He's not very like strong at one specific game, but overall, he's just a very like good player. He's not like super strong in anything, but he's like decent at everything, which will definitely help this team. Now, I do think this team is really good at Relic. I think Relic could be a very good game for this team, especially the more strategy based ones, I feel. Which also kind of applies to Gold Runners, as having a good strategy for that does help out a lot. And I believe Irish has had like very good strategies for Gold Runners in the past that have helped her teams do very well. But other than that, they aren't the best at PvP. So I definitely think the more like non PvP games they will do better in, like Spleef, Relic, and maybe Build Arena. That one's a bit more 50-50, in my opinion, because most of the people tend to be okay at it. So it ends up being like very close, but otherwise, they do have a way to win. And if Battle Royale gets skipped again, that will definitely help this team. Next up, we have Green Griffins with In the Lad, TF Brit, and Genfire. Now, Jen didn't have a very good last event, although in fairness, the roster for that event was very not balanced. So, in fairness, that's not fault. Although I don't think either way they did the best. Although I didn't personally watch much of that last event because I was busy, so I wouldn't really know. And then we have TF Brit, who has not played in a while, to my knowledge, as I don't remember the last time he played. Although I did do some research, he's very good at Riff Race, which I definitely think will definitely help this team because Ian is also like pretty good at race, so they can have a very dominant Riff Race with like second, third, first, like it go either way. And this team is very strong in Rift Race. But otherwise, I don't really know how good he is in other games. He's decent at Spleef to my knowledge, but otherwise, I don't know. And then we have Ian, who overall is just like very well rounded. He's more of a movement player, like in games like Rift Race and such. But he isn't the worst at PvP, and he can definitely do like very well in it. It's just more dependent on teams. Now, as far as games this team will do good in, other than Rift Race, obviously, I definitely think there is a possibility they could do good in Gauntlet. I don't really know how good TF Brit is at parkour, but I believe Ian's not the worst, so that could help. And then, other than that, I think this also could be a very good like spleef team. Ian tends to do like pretty well, so that will definitely help. And I also believe TF Brit is not that bad at it as well, and neither is Jen. So I definitely think this team can still do like very well. But yeah. Next up, we have the Purple Penguins with Evident P, Bear, and Gigi the Puppy. Now, this team is very okay, and the reason why is because of Evident's first event. Evident did not do very well in most of the games. He struggled quite a bit. Although with this event having many more new maps specifically for Rift Race, I think this will definitely increase his chance of doing better than last time. Especially he knows how to play the games this time. Now, otherwise, he did do very good in Gold Runners, which is PvP related, which obviously means he's better at PvP games, and I would agree with that. He seems more PvP oriented than anything movement related. So I definitely think if this team can get Battle Royale, they will do very well. Then we have Bear, who's just another like all-rounded player. She's not like too strong in anything besides like maybe Spleef. Otherwise, she's like just very middle of the pack, just decent at like everything else, which will definitely help. I think with this team's like statistics being very low. And then we have Gigi. Now, Gigi struggles a bit more in like movement related things, but otherwise in more like team oriented games like Gold Runners, Relic, Building, she can do like very good. Like she has done very well in those games specifically before. Now, as far as this team's best games, I do think they will need to get PvP out. Like, they really need PvP games. Like, otherwise, they might struggle a bit harder in the movement games that they are not, like, the best at. Hopefully, Evident will do better in Gauntlet because he didn't know how the portals worked last time, so hopefully he'll understand them this time, which will help the team out more overall. But otherwise, this team really just needs to avoid like movement at all costs, which thankfully movement games usually get played really early on in MCBC. Like Rift Race and Gauntlet are usually like the first two games out, so that'll definitely help them. Last but not least, we have the Orange Otters with Generous, Defect, and Hello X Alley. Now, this team technically only has, I believe, two, if not no newcomers. But Defect has never played a full event. He actually subbed in for Bingus and I believe MCBC 18. And I don't know about Alley, but I feel like she was either meant to or just wasn't able to like play an MCBC before. But this team isn't like relatively unexperienced. Now, Defect, when he did play, he did do like very decent. He definitely made up for like Bingus's disconnecting. He did just very like solid in every game. not too like strong, but not too like bad. Especially in Overrun, I believe, where he did pretty decent. Now, Generous is more like movement based, but he is pretty like decent at like games like Spleef, I believe. Like pretty dang good. And then sometimes he does like fumble in movement games, but he's overall not too bad. PvP is as strong for him, but he's still like decent at it. And then we have Ali, who I don't really think is the best at movement. I don't really know how to compare her, as she hasn't really played any events to my knowledge. So saying she's like bad or good at something, you're gonna have to take this with a grain of salt. So I definitely think she'll do better in like team games where she can help out our team as best as possible. And I feel like she's not like the worst at PvP. Not like as good as some of the other people, but she's not like bad, so she can definitely hold her weight. Now, as far as games this team can do good in, it's really like 50-50. They all like cover each other's like weaknesses to where they're just like middle of the road and everything. They're not like too strong at anything. Now, Defect hasn't played Rift Race, which could be like a bad thing, although it is most likely a new map, so that won't really matter as much. So that will actually be a benefit for him and also Ali. So this team's just not very strong in anything. They're just gonna be all rounded, which can be very good because not being weak at any game gives them the possibility of still like making it. And yeah. And that is it for this MCBC 21 teams review. These teams are very balanced, like very. There is no team, in my opinion, that dominates one more than the other. They're all just like around the same skill. So good job to Slater time because I do know Festa was a charity event, but also the teams were very unbalanced. But yeah, if you enjoyed, again, make sure to like and maybe even subscribe. But yeah, bye bye.